Thank you. So here's what's really ironic. I come from Amazon. I'm not going to talk about technology. And I'm an engineer. And what I'm going to talk about is your role as HR officers and HR leaders, because I think there's never been a time that's been more important for your function in so many ways. And you heard some of this yesterday. My name's Brun. I lead a team called Executives in Residence. We're all former C-somethings. CTO, CIO, CFO, CEOs. My job is quite simple in Amazon. It's to help you make your own mistakes, not someone else's, quite simply. And boy, do we like to make the same mistake as everyone else as we try and transform our organizations. Out of curiosity, who's been through a transformation and got to the end and said, that was incredible? Really? How many of you drink regularly? Okay. So what I want to describe to you is a better way of transforming, and it's something my co-author, Jana Werner, and I have spent about 2.5 years thinking about, and we recently published with Harvard on the topic. And I've got some questions for you as I go. But let's think about our organizational structures today, and many of you will recognize these structures. They're built based on 19th century values and norms. So you've got spans of control, depth of organization, those beautiful silos that are designed to actually block work from getting done across the organization. We measure people based on compliance and predictability and following decision-making rules. And we still treat a lot of our people as if they're interchangeable cogs. We can just unplug one and plug another one in. And in our desire to change our organizations to become more agile, more adaptive, more resilient, what we do is we apply old ways of working to an old model and expect a new outcome. And Jana and I, over, I think, about 12 bottles of wine, looked at all of the things that went wrong with transformations. And we called these dysfunctions. So we found over 300 dysfunctions. For instance, a simple one would be a CEO who comes into a multinational company and says, we're going to centralize everything, because centralization is efficient, and efficient is cost-effective, and cost-effective is good. Except they've created this massive bottleneck, and everything has to go through the headquarters. And we took these 300 anti-patterns, these 300 dysfunctions, and created what we call 38 anti-patterns. They're habitual, conditioned responses. Those knee-jerk reactions we have. We've got this problem, we're going to apply this solution. And those solutions typically don't work. Now, I would take you through all 300 dysfunctions. I think I'd run out of time. But let me give you a quick example of one of them. Has anyone heard the story about the squirrels going through Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam? Has everyone eaten? Okay. 400 squirrels were being flown from China to Greece. Don't ask why, not part of the story. And they went via Schiphol Airport, and they didn't have the right paperwork. And the worker responsible for squirrels without paperwork looked at the manual and found nothing in there about what to do with squirrels without paperwork. But there was something about livestock without paperwork. And the worker followed the process. He took 400 live squirrels and dropped them into an industrial chicken shredder. True story. Now, good news is 20 of them escaped. But the real moral of the story is there was outrage, and the CEO was invited onto TV. And what he said was telling. I know it didn't look good, but we were just following the process. Sounds familiar? Many of our organizations are more geared towards following a process, almost regardless of what the outcome of the process is. Very industrial revolution. So what we do is we bring in lots of outside help. They measure spans of control, depth of organization. You spend 5% on training. I think I can spend 4%. We look across industries, and we pick up best practices, and we implement best practices. And the great thing about best practices is once you've implemented them, there can't be anything better because they're best practices, and they actually prevent change. And we feed this into a machine, and out of the machine pops an org chart, which is the least effective way of actually changing an organization. And most org changes actually feel a little bit more like this. It feels like someone's wired your building with dynamite, press the plunger. They're soul-destroying. And even worse is once you've finished your transformation, everyone gets back to business as usual. And you start going backwards because you stop changing. Does that sound familiar? Now, the reason for that is we still treat organizations as if they're complicated. In fact, we treat them a little bit like the Tin Man from Wizard of Oz. Heartless, no soul, creaky, rusty, slow-moving. You can take an arm off and plug another arm in. And we pretend that change is actually good and our employees are going to get excited about it. And the reality is most of our employees only have one question. Do I still have a job? And I'm not talking about this academically either. Who eats at McDonald's out of curiosity? Come on. Yeah, thank you. That's a test of your honesty. You failed. I spent 31 years at McDonald's Corporation, one of the biggest companies in terms of number of people in the world. And we lived through many of these challenges, and we changed how we approach change itself and ended up adding tens of billions of dollars to the top line sales of McDonald's. Now, the reality is, for any systems thinkers in the audience, change is complex. Organizations are complex. You change how you reward someone, it's going to have a second, third, fourth, fifth order effect. And you can either try and predict all of those effects, or you can get much more comfortable with iterative change within the organization. Let me give you an example. You spoke about AI yesterday. We're pretty sophisticated, Amazon, as an organization when it comes to machine learning. We've been using machine learning for 28 years. But even agentic AI is new to us. And what we found is, as we've thought about changing our own workflows and business processes, it entails over 250 changes to the average organization. And there's no way you can build a project plan on all of those changes. So the old ways of transforming, what's my org chart meant to look like, doesn't work anymore. So when we came up with this metaphor of an octopus, a biological creature, absolutely amazing creature. It can play the piano, completely useless in your day job. I just found it a fascinating fact. It grows up without parents. It has to learn its way around the world. It hasn't evolved its physical structure for over 250 million years, unlike most of our organizations, which change our structure every 2 years. But what it does cleverly is it has 2/3 of its neurons in its arms. So each arm can act semi-independently of the main brain. And it can use that to quickly adapt and be resilient within its own environment. And when we think about that metaphor, a few things apply to organizations. Firstly, we need to start doing change with people, not to people. This idea that we can, from a central brain, from a corporate headquarters, dictate change doesn't work. People resist change only because they don't want change inflicted on them. How do you bring them on a journey? And one of the things we find in our job is most of our employees actually know where your issues are and actually know what to do about them, but we don't listen to them. Secondly, change is continuous. This idea that every day you can become better. And then thirdly, that dovetails with this idea that when I do my day job, I can also experiment and learn about new ways of improving. I can bring my entire organization along by giving them the agency to do their jobs differently. In fact, in Amazon, we have a term for this. We call these organizations day one organizations. And you can tell a day one organization, because if all of you came to me and said, everything Amazon does is brilliant, the correct response would be, thank you, but I know there's something I can do better. I just haven't figured it out yet. So this idea of taking out complacency from an organization. I lived through that at McDonald's. We were losing 500 million transactions because we weren't listening to the customer, we weren't continuing to evolve, we were only looking at data that reinforced our own prejudices and mental models. Now, rather than take you through all of the anti-patterns, we found the 3 things need to be true for organizations to continually evolve. There needs to be clarity. Why does the organization exist? What's important to the organization? How am I doing as an individual? There needs to be ownership, this idea that none of us just want to do a job description. We want to feel like we make a difference. Our job is actually connected to a bigger purpose. And then that innately human characteristic, curiosity. This desire to ask questions and improve the world or our product or our job. And these are actually all self-reinforcing. The clearer I am about what good looks like, the more likely I am to take ownership of something. The more I take ownership and I feel it's mine, the more I'm going to be curious and want to experiment because I know I can make it better. And the more I experiment, the more clarity I bring about what our customers really want in an organization. Let me give you a couple of examples of each of these. And here's what I would like you to take away. You've got this awesome accountability as HR professionals to light 1,000 fires in your organization. Not in a year's time through a big transformation program, but today or tomorrow. Lots of little changes and giving your people agency. Let's start with clarity. Who enjoys giving feedback? I sort of expect it from you lot. Most feedback in organizations feels like a corporate colonoscopy. It's unpleasant, it happens once a year, and you just want to forget it happened. And yet that is the compost. Feedback is the compost of innovation. It creates psychological safety. It drives an organization faster. Let me give you a quick story. When we were writing the book, we met a CEO of a sports apparel company, Brun. Benedict was driving to Afghanistan to go climb a mountain. He was an extreme mountaineer, and he said, Phil, Jana, here's what most extreme mountaineers do. They take 5 days to summit and come back down. And they go through the death zone at 8,000 meters, where oxygen can't sustain life. So they carry 60 kilos of equipment. They trudge up the mountain, and then they trudge back down again. If everything goes well, which it never does. Here's what I do. Here's what Benedict does. He cuts his shoelaces, cuts the tags off his clothes, shaves his hair, shaves his eyebrows, carries no more than 7.4 kilos of equipment, summits and skis back down in 2 days. Interesting story. But what's that got to do with business? His point was quite simple. As a leader, his job wasn't just to set priorities. It was actually to clear the way and scrap as many other things that were happening in the organization as possible. I would ask you the question, but I think you know the answer, about how many of you are good at multitasking. Our neural architecture doesn't support it, and yet we give people multiple priorities, which is ironic, given before the 19th century, the word priority didn't have a plural. How can it? How can you have multiple priorities? Something has to be the most important. Or even the Johannesburg Stock Exchange CEO who had the hell yes test. As you sit around the table as a leadership team, where's your energy? Where are you saying, hell yes, we have to invest in this, rather than just saying, yeah, let's do that, let's do that, let's do that. All that does is create confusion and distraction. The other thing we see these great organizations do is flood the system with data. Too many organizations hold data in their functions, and you have to ask permission. The best organizations assume they can trust their employees. Give them as much data as possible, particularly in a world of AI, where everyone can use tools to improve their job. And they let them get on with experimentation, because someone in that organization is going to use that data in a way you can't even imagine sitting around a corporate table. Second is ownership. Has anyone heard the story of the pig and the chicken? No? Everyone's eaten? Lots of animals were harmed in the making of this PowerPoint, by the way. Pig and chicken walk down the road. Chicken says to pig, let's open a restaurant. Pig says to chicken, okay, what are we going to sell? Chicken says to pig, ham and eggs, of course. Pig stops and says, you know I have to be more committed than you do. And the moral of the story is, apart from eat less bacon, is how many pigs do you have in your organization? Now, as HR professionals, I know you can't call them pigs. In Amazon, we call them single-threaded leaders. In Apple, they call them directly responsible individuals. Who is waking up every morning and thinking, on a major initiative, are we going to deliver the value expected? Not in HR, not in IT, not in marketing, but for the organization. Too often, everyone's involved, but no one's committed. And make decisions faster, make decisions smaller, push them closer to the front line. 70% of, we tend to take decisions when we have 70% of the information. Because if we're waiting for 90%, we're moving too slowly. And to move fast, we trust the people at the front line of the organization. And by the way, if you don't trust the people at the front line of your organization, that's your problem too. And then secondly, in terms of ownership, you all know what psychological safety is, and yet there are so many misconceptions. We had the privilege of talking to Amy Edmondson at Harvard, who's the mother of psychological safety. And she says, look, you can't build psychological safety at an organizational level. You can only do it at the team level. And your leaders, your team leaders need to know how to do that. Simple things, like stop making assumptions. If someone in a meeting says, hey, I think there's a better way of doing it, and here's my idea, don't immediately respond with, oh, we tried that. It's not going to work. We tried it 5 years ago. Approach this with curiosity. The average leader, the average manager knows only 40% of the work, at best, that their people does. So let's trust our people to actually have these great ideas. Let's listen harder and create an environment where they can contribute. And maybe initially provide different contribution options, anonymous feedback. We don't use PowerPoint in Amazon. We're very much a written culture, which actually makes you think harder and takes away from looking at the person presenting and puts the focus more on the idea. Does anyone work with brilliant jerks? Yeah, a few of you. You know they're brilliant because they tell you all the time. We've all worked with them. But when we think about psychological safety at a team level, brilliant jerks destroy twice as much value as an A-team player. In fact, sports tells us if you bring together a group of average players, they will typically outperform a group of top players who can't actually bond and create psychological safety. So I'm not suggesting physically eliminating brilliant jerks, maybe as a last resort, but just recognizing that these people it's easy to go to because they always have the answers, are actually probably stopping teamwork being created within your organization. And we know that most value today gets created not because of that beautiful org structure you have on a piece of paper, but despite it. It's about bringing people together across your organization. And the third topic, curiosity. Does anyone have all of the answers to how to structure and create a culture in a world of agentic AI? None of us have lived through it. The only way we learn is by learning, by being curious. For those with kids of about 5 to 6 years old, how many questions do they ask an hour? Any guesses? 100? Not bad. Officially up to about 107 an hour. Why is the sky blue? Why? How many does an average young adult entering the workplace ask? 2 to 3. We train people to have answers in a world where there aren't answers in much of what we do. It's crazy. Let me ask you a question, see how curious you are. Where do square trees grow? Anyone with kids? Minecraft is one. I won't put you on the spot. They grow in Panama, true story. The only reason I ask that question is from asking the question to the time you get an answer, what you feel is curiosity. You get no reward, no extrinsic reward for knowing the answer, and yet you want to know the answer. That's what curiosity feels like, and we need more of that in organizations. Does anyone enjoy failing fast? Has anyone got promoted for failing often? Probably not. So let's change the language in organizations. We spoke to Astro Teller. Astro's an amazing person. He's the CEO of the Alphabet Moonshot Labs. They do things like self-driving cars and try to put the internet on hot air balloons to bring connectivity to the world. He's a real big thinker. But he says, what prevents us thinking big and experimenting is we've been trained to feel that failure is shameful and we should avoid it at all costs. We should only go after things which are certain. And he had some advice which we also use in Amazon, I've used in my past life. First one is, in a world where there are no answers to many of the questions we have, or we don't even know the questions, When you come up with an initiative, do a pre-mortem. And here's what a pre-mortem is. It's 6 months in the future. You've launched the initiative. It's gone so badly wrong that when you walk down the corridor, you can't even look your colleagues in the eyes. What happened? And what's amazing about pre-mortems is it triggers curiosity in people. They'll quite happily scribble away about all the things that could go wrong, helping you de-risk the initiative. Has anyone done post-mortems? A few folks? Post-mortems are typically where you look for someone else to blame. They're not good for curiosity because we feel that failure is shameful. So pre-mortems are great. Second one is come up with a hypothesis. Rather than as a leader say, I've decided we're going to run this particular initiative, which basically is declaring you are right. Gives you no wiggle room to ever say you're wrong. Say, hey, my hypothesis is if we do X, we're going to get Y. Let's go test the hypothesis. The hypothesis may be wrong, in which case you've learned something which is valuable, or it may be right. Again, you've learned something and you've delivered something of value. So simple things around reframing how we think about experiments and transforming our own organization are powerful. The only true failure from experimentation is not learning anything. If you know the answer to an experiment, it's not an experiment. You're not trying hard enough. My final question for you about thinking big, about the destiny of your organizations. If you want a monkey to sit on a 10-foot pedestal and recite Shakespeare, what would you do first? Psychologically safe environment, any answers count? Put a banana on the pedestal? Okay, I'll let you off. Here's what most enterprise execs do. They'd build the pedestal. Hey, boss, build a pedestal. Beautiful pedestal. It's version 1. Version 2 is coming out next year. Version 2 is going to be gold, and it's going to be 20 feet tall. Is the monkey ever going to talk? No. So we fall in this trap. Sometimes we don't think big enough. And if we don't think big, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Small thinking begets small results. But when we think big, the first thing we should test is the riskiest part of the proposition, or the biggest assumption. In this case, is the monkey ever going to talk? And here's the thing. When one of your team, one of your leaders comes and says, monkey's never going to talk, I'm going to shut the project down, celebrate that. They've just saved you potentially millions of euros, months of effort, all because us humans don't like to say we were wrong. In fact, we suffer from something called loss aversion. Even scientists who study loss aversion suffer from loss aversion. If we don't have clear, quick criteria up front to an initiative, we will continue to pile money and time into an initiative just because we one day hope that monkey's going to talk, and it won't. Let me just wrap up with a few thoughts. Transformation doesn't need to be as difficult as it is today. It doesn't need to suffer from the 70 to 90% failure rate, which has existed for the last 20 to 30 years. Our organizations must adapt in an era of agentic AI, but also in an era where we have these brilliant knowledge workers who we put 42 levels of management on top of to tell them how to do the job we hired them to do in the first place. Things have got to change. People want to work in an environment where they can truly make a difference. Most organizations don't even understand how work really gets done across their organization. We saw this at McDonald's, where there was 160 handoffs to get a new version of e-commerce into the hands of customers. No one designs a system like that. It happens over time. And people like yourselves need to step back and become architects of your system, not necessarily working in the system. So take some advice from one of the chief transformation officers we worked with in South Africa. Go back and light 1,000 fires. Have 1,000 of your employees, 10 or 100 or 10,000 of your employees experiment, come up with a hypothesis. How can they eliminate work? How can they put more time into the areas that are important to them? How can you amplify the fact that these individuals will have fun as a consequence and feel important and listened to? And take their learnings, whether their experiments failed or not, and amplify those across the organization. If we don't start thinking differently about our organizations today, someone else is going to. The biggest risk we face in most organizations isn't our competitors. It's our very organizations moving so slowly in an era where technology can pretty much do anything you can imagine. So with that, thank you so much for your time, and enjoy the rest of the day.